us. And Allah always has our back. The shortcoming is on my part, on our part. That when I experience life, there's no guilt in feeling sadness at a loss or happiness at the gain of something. No, no, no. But where does that happiness or sadness lead me? If it leads me somewhere else, then it can become problematic. But I have to find a way to have this happiness, this sadness, this difficulty, this adversity, this blessing to always continuously lead me back to Allah. And the difficulties are a little bit more trying. The sadness is more trying than the happiness. And so in that moment of sadness, look for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help you. Allah will rescue you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there for us in miraculous ways, like He was for Ibrahim alayhi salam. Alhamdulillah. الحمد لله علي الذات عظيم الصفات سمي السمات كبير الشأن جليل القدر رفيع الذكر مطاع الأمر جلي البرهان فخيم الاسم غزير العلم وسيل الحلم كثير الغفران جميل الثناء جزيل العطاء مجيب الدعاء عميم الإحسان سريع الحساب شديد العقاب أليم العذاب عزيز السلطان ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له في الخلق والأمر ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله المبعوث إلى الأسود والأحمر المنعوت بشرح الصدر ورفع الذكر وصلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه الذين هم خلاصة العرب العرباء وخير الخلائق بعد الأنبياء أما بعد فيا أيها الناس وحدوا الله فإن التوحيد رأس الطاعات واتقوا الله فإن التقوى ملاك الحسنات وعليكم بالسنة فإن السنة تهدي إلى الطاعة ومن أطاع الله ورسوله فقد رشد واهتدى وإياكم والبدعة فإن البدعة تهدي إلى المعصية ومن يعص الله ورسوله فقد ضل وغوى وعليكم بالإحسان فإن الله يحب المحسنين وادعوه فإنه مجيب الداعين واستغفروه يمددكم بأموال وبنين أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وقال ربكم ادعوني أستجب لكم إن الذين يستكبرون عن عبادتي سيدخلون جهنم داخلين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran provides for us guidance. But when we oftentimes talk about guidance, we talk about it in a very abstract or sometimes in an impractical manner. What does that mean that Allah provides guidance for us? What is the essence of guidance? The word itself in the Arabic language, it means to take someone by the hand and walk them along and lead them down the path. In classical Arabic, the walking stick of a blind person would be called hadiyah. Something that would lead that person along the way. So the idea of guidance is that a lot of times when we don't understand what to do, when we can't make sense of the circumstances, the situation, when there is an apparent conflict between our human realities and maybe what our spiritual demands are of us, that is where Islam, that is where the Quran, that is where the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ serves as hidayah, guidance. It reconciles the differences. It settles the issue. It provides answers to our questions, solutions to our problems. One huge issue that we all suffer through as human beings, and this is a very real struggle, and something we have to figure out and we have to reconcile as human beings, and that is that there are certain human realities. And a big part of what makes a human being is one of the greatest strengths, but also one of the greatest weaknesses we have, and that is the emotional capacity of the human being. We experience different emotions, and these emotions are the consequences of our circumstances. They are the outcome of different things that we deal with on a day in, day out basis. And so, if you take objectively, outside of all other considerations, just the emotional ups and downs that a person experiences, from happiness to sadness, grief and sorrow, celebration and elation, When you take a look at these different emotional experiences a person has, the ups and downs are a very accurate assessment of what that becomes. It is a roller coaster ride. It is a roller coaster ride of human emotions, ups and downs. But then what happens is we read the book of Allah, we read the Quran. And the Quran emphasizes belief and iman in Allah. Tawakkul, putting your trust and your reliance upon Allah. Having patience, sabr. Having gratitude, shukr. The Prophet ﷺ talks about the value of contentment and satisfaction. Sakina, tamanina, qana'a. So having your trust and your dependence and your reliance upon Allah, putting your faith and your trust in Allah, connecting your heart to Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-haq, which doesn't just mean the truth, but it means the one who is solid and stable and firm. So when we put our trust in Him, we put our faith in Him, that creates the notion and the idea of, then is it justified? Is it okay for me to be sad? Is it okay for me to experience difficulty? To struggle? To go through ups and downs? Or does that contradict the very nature of iman and faith? And this is a huge issue a lot of people are trying to figure out. That if somebody's sad, they'll be reprimanded and say, you don't have good iman. You have weak faith. Because if you had solid faith, you wouldn't be sad. A believer is never sad. We read a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that the Prophet ﷺ says that all of the affairs of the believer are good. عَجَبًا لِأَمْرِ الْمُؤْمِنِ إِنَّ أَمْرَهُ كُلَّهُ لَهُ خَيْرٌ. It's all good. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran is saying, وَاللَّهُ وَلِيُّ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Allah is the friend of those who believe. So then what do you do with these emotional experiences? How do we reconcile this? And the Quran provides the answer, as it always does. The guidance. And the Quran provides, this is what's magnificent about the book of Allah. When it provides the answer to a very human problem, a human question, it didn't just provide the answer in the form of text, or a theory, or an instruction, or a command. It provided the solution in the form, through the example of human beings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells about people who came before us. Great men of faith who came before us. The prophets of Allah, the messengers of God, alayhimus salatu wassalam. It gives us their example that, look, these were human beings. And these human beings, they were the pinnacle of faith and belief. None of us will ever surpass them in faith and belief and connection to Allah. They directly received revelation and communicated with Allah. They were the chosen, selected slaves of Allah. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us something fascinating. Did they experience ups and downs? Did they experience difficulty? Yes, they did. Did they feel overwhelmed at times? Yes, they did. But then what's the reconciliation? How did they handle it? So the answer to the problem, the solution to this issue, is that it's not so much the issue of us experiencing ups and downs, being happy and then being sad and then being happy again. That is part of the human reality. And we are not to feel guilty because I do feel happy and then I do feel sad at other times. But it's how do I handle that happiness and that sadness? What recourse do I seek when I do experience emotional ups and downs and difficulties? And that's the example Allah presents in the Quran. And there are dozens of these examples. I'll share one of them with you today. And then we'll get to what is the actual solution? What is the recourse for me? What can I do when I am experiencing the roller coaster that is life? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in one place in the Quran gives us the example of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Ibrahim alayhi salam is talked about throughout the entire Quran. Different stages, different phases of his life, different experiences. One very fascinating experience of his life that is very well known and well documented is mentioned in Surah number 21, Surah Al-Anbiya, the surah about the prophets. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he reached a young, mature age, he was a young, mature man. وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ رُشْدَهُ مِنْ قَبْلِ. He was a young, mature man. And he was very frustrated. He had reconciled all the different issues that were there in regards to faith and belief in his community and his society. And he had found conviction and confidence in his faith and his belief in Allah. And so at that time, he started to grow very frustrated. Again, an emotional experience. He was growing frustrated with his people in regards to their worship and their belief in idols. ما هذه إذ قال لأبيه وقومه ما هذه التماثيل التي أنتم لها عاكفون. He said, what are these sculptures, these statues that you show such devotion to? أنتم لها عاكفون. You are so devoted to them. And so this conversation takes place. They say, بل وجدنا عليها آباءنا لها عابدين. We found our forefathers, وجدنا آباءنا لها عابدين. We found our forefathers worshiping them, and that's what we continue to do. And so he tells them that that doesn't make it right. That just means that they were just as confused as you are. But think critically about what you're doing. And so they refuse to engage in any intelligent conversation with him. And they stay stubborn. So eventually Ibrahim a.s. lets them know that I will find a way to teach you this lesson, to open your eyes to the reality of the falseness, the falsehood of what you believe in. So the story goes on that the people went out of town for a festival or a carnival or whatever it was, some celebration. Ibrahim a.s. stays back. فَجَعَلَهُمْ جُذَاذًا. And he goes and he smashes and breaks up all the idols. إِلَّا كَبِيرًا لَهُمْ لَعَلَّهُمْ إِلَيْهِ يَرْجِعُونَ. Except for the largest one, so that they're able to come back and realize. And he leaves the largest one. In some of the narrations in the books of Tafasir, they mention that even the tool, the instrument, the axe, or the sledgehammer that he used to smash up all the idols, he hung that from the neck of that largest idol. And now when the people return back, they say, مَنْ فَعَلَ هَذَا بِآلِهَتِنَا إِنَّهُ لَمِنَ. They're outraged. Who did this to our idols? Whoever did this is a terrible human being. So some people say, سَمِعْنَا فَتًى يَذْكُرُهُمْ يُقَالُ لَهُ إِبْرَاهِيم. There's a young man by the name of Ibrahim. We've heard him talking ill of the idols in the past. So they say, فَأْتُوا بِهِ عَلَىٰ أَعْيُنِ النَّاسِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَشْهَدُونَ. Go and bring him so that we can make an example out of him in front of everyone. So that when Ibrahim a.s. is presented to them, they ask him, أَأَنْتَ فَعَلْتَ هَذَا بِآلِهَتِنَا يَا إِبْرَاهِيم? Are you the one who did this with our idols, O Ibrahim? Ibrahim a.s. challenges their intellect. He says, بَلْ فَعَلَهُ كَبِيرُهُمْ. Why couldn't have the largest one done this? They're all smashed and broken. He's the only one left standing. And he's holding the smoking gun. Why couldn't it be him? So they respond by saying that you know that they can't speak or talk. So then he tells them, and then the Quran mentions something very fascinating here. It says, فَرَجَعُوا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ. فَرَجَعُوا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ. For a moment, they looked back inward. They took an honest look at themselves. And they introspected. And they realized, إِنَّكُمْ أَنْتُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Maybe we are doing something wrong. ثُمَّ نُكِسُوا عَلَىٰ رُؤُوسِهِمْ. But then they go right back to where they were. And they reject and they refuse this challenge that Ibrahim a.s. presents to them. And say, why would you taunt us like this? Why would you say that? You know they don't speak. And he says that you worship something, مَا لَا يَنْفَعُكُمْ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَضُرُّكُمْ. It can't help you or benefit you in the least bit. You worship something like that? So now the people gather together. Now he's pushed them to the point where they realize the error of their ways, but they realize what they have to lose maybe in terms of the status quo, the culture, the prominence, the political power that they have. So they realize we need to change this up really quickly. So they create propaganda. They turn it into a public cause. That you need to persecute Ibrahim. You need to deal with him. We need to teach him a lesson. We need to make an example out of him. And defend your gods, defend your idols. In kuntum fa'ilin. If you're going to do anything at all, defend your idols. And they turned it into this cause. So they said, what do we do? Harriquhu. So burn him. Wansuru aliyatakum. And help your gods. Burning him is helping your gods. So they created this propaganda. So now they start building and kindling a fire. And the narrations mention that because it became this propaganda, and everyone got swept up into this political rhetoric that they were spewing. So now everybody starts pitching in and getting together. Some of Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah ta'ala mentions narrations that like an old woman would come who was very ill, very sick, and she comes holding some wood, some firewood, and she comes to throw it into the fire, and they said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm throwing this into the firewood, so I'm throwing this firewood to kindle the fire further. At my contribution, I will be cured from my sickness." So it became this weird obsession that these people had with building this fire. And they eventually end up building such a huge, humongous fire that they can't even get close to it. They can't get near it. For days and days and days, people are coming and throwing things into the fire, and it just gets so out of hand, they can't control it, they can't get near it. So they finally come to the point where they say, now it's time to throw Ibrahim into the fire. But we can't get close enough to put him in the middle of the fire. So they build a contraption like a catapult to launch him into the fire. So now they take Ibrahim alayhi salam, they restrain him, they tie up his hands, they tie up his legs so he can't get away. They put him inside of the contraption, the machine, the catapult, and they put him in there ready to launch him off into the fire. As Ibrahim alayhi salam, the narrations tell us, Ibn Kathir rahimahullah ta'ala mentions many narrations, that as he's sitting there inside of the catapult, arms and legs tied up, completely helpless, to the eye, to the visible eyes, completely helpless, restrained, sitting inside of this, hundreds of people around him ready to launch him into the fire, he looks up at the sky. Now Ibrahim alayhi salam is overwhelmed. He's anxious, he's overwhelmed. It's very traumatic, this experience. That's not the issue or the problem. How does he handle that difficult situation? He looks up at the sky. And he says, Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is enough for me. And He is the best of caretakers. One narration mentions, he says, Allahumma anta al-wahid fi as-sama. Oh Allah, you are the only one to be worshipped. Wa anta al-wahid, wa anta al-wahid fi as-sama, wa ana wahidun fi al-ardi ya'buduka. And I am the only one in the earth right now who worships you properly, Ya Allah. You're the only one to be worshipped, and I'm the only one worshiping you properly, Ya Allah. Please protect me. Take care of me. And they come and they launch him into the fire. Now I want you to try to, a lot of times when we talk about these stories, we don't really put ourselves in that position and understand what that experience must have been like. I want you to imagine flying through the air. There's no parachute, there's no bungee cord, there's no restraint, there's no control over this at all. You're literally flailing through the air. Hands and legs tied up, turning end over end like a football, just flying through the air. Think about the feeling of helplessness that would take grip of a person in that situation. That's where faith comes in. And so as he's flying through the air, when he reaches the peak of his trajectory, as he's flying through the air, and he begins to come downward now, falling face first towards a humongous, raging, burning fire, the biggest fire anyone there has ever seen. It's almost as if time freezes in that moment. And Jibreel alayhi salam comes to Ibrahim alayhi salam, the angel Gabriel. Jibreel comes to Ibrahim alayhi salam, and he says, Ya Khalil Allah, O friend of God. He says all of the creation of Allah witnesses this. In horror and dismay. They are shocked that this is happening with the friend of Allah. I have permission to come and ask you, Alaka haja, is there anything that you need? Is there anything that you need? Is there anything I can do for you? And Ibrahim alayhi salam responds very insightfully. It's so insightful his response. He doesn't say, I don't need anything, because, and that again proves his humanity. I do need something. But he says, Amma ilayka fala. Do I need anything from you? No. I need something, but not from you. Hasbi Allah. He reiterates, Hasbi Allah. Allah is enough for me. And Allah is the best of caretakers, and He will take care of me. He turns directly to Allah, puts his faith and trust in Allah, not denying the situation. Yes, I am flying through the air, falling face first into a raging, burning fire. This is sure death that I'm plunging towards. Not denying the circumstances, but understanding and affirming the fact that Allah is in control. And Allah is there for me. And Allah has my back. He says, Amma ilayka fala. As far as you are concerned, I don't need narrations mention, and the Quran even mentions, that what happened then? He put his faith in Allah in a difficult situation. He was able, and of course this is a prophet of Allah, so he has that ability. What we can learn about ourselves in that moment is that if we are able to keep Allah in mind, to keep Allah in our hearts, and to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to not lose faith in Allah, to stay connected to Allah, to remember Allah, to bring Allah's name on our lips in those difficult moments, what happens then? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saves him. But how does Allah save him? Think about how many solutions we could come up with, especially these days, with video games and CGI and just the way that people's imagination works today. Think of the number of solutions you could come up with that scenario, with that situation. It could start raining so heavily that it could put out the fire. A huge wind could start to blow and to scatter the fire. Ibrahim a.s. could all of a sudden develop the ability to fly, and he would have just flown away like Superman. A giant bird would have swooped down from the sky, Lord of the Rings style, picked him up and carried him off. Just a sheer number of solutions there. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps him, and He helps him how? He helps him in the most miraculous way possible. Allah defies what people call the laws of nature to show the fact and to teach us a lesson thousands of years later, that when somebody in their most difficult trying moments keeps Allah in mind, in heart, and stays connected to Allah, Allah will provide for them not just solutions, but the most miraculous solutions. Allah will provide solutions that you couldn't even fathom. وَيَرْزُقُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ, in ways and situations that you couldn't even imagine. Allah commands of her, قُلْنَا, He says in the Quran, we said, Ya nar, O fire, kuni bardan, be cool. Become cold, cool. And Ibn Kathir actually mentions here, that from the narrations of some of the Sahaba, Ibn Mas'ud says, that if Allah had not continued on and said salaman, He would have just said kuni bardan. The fire, all of the creation of Allah is so submissive to Allah, it would have become so cold that Ibrahim a.s. would have died by freezing to death. So submitted to Allah. But Allah said, Kuni bardan, become cool, cold, wa salaman, and safe, peaceful, tranquil, ala Ibrahim, for Ibrahim specifically. And Ibrahim a.s. lands in this fire. And nothing happens to him. Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma mentions here that because Allah said become cool and peaceful, safe for Ibrahim, that the ropes that were tied to his hands and his legs, that's not Ibrahim. So the ropes that were burned to his hands and his feet, the ropes that were tied to his hands and his feet, those ropes burned without burning a single hair on his body. But just the ropes burned. And it didn't harm a single hair on his head. Not a single spot on his body was burned. And that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala miraculously saved him. And when we read this, when we understand this, when we internalize this, we understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When He said, وَكُلًّا نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ, and all of these stories of the messengers that came before you, when we tell you these stories, what is the function and the purpose of these stories? مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ, so that we may solidify your heart. We may give stability to your heart and your emotions when you are experiencing a very wide range of emotions. That's why Allah didn't say qalb, He said fu'ad. Fu'ad is when the heart is racing up and down and experiencing a whole range of emotions. Allah said, through these stories of the prophets, we will teach you how to find that center, that tranquility, that peace again. What we can take from this, what we need to learn from this, what we need to keep in mind is that Allah is always there. And Allah is always there for us. And Allah always has our back. The shortcoming is on my part, on our parts. That when I experience life, there's no guilt in feeling sadness at a loss or happiness at the gain of something. No. But where does that happiness or sadness lead me? If it leads me somewhere else, then it can become problematic. But I have to find a way to have this happiness, this sadness, this difficulty, this adversity, this blessing, to always continuously lead me back to Allah. And the difficulties are a little bit more trying. The sadness is more trying than the happiness. And so in that moment of sadness, Look for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help you. Allah will rescue you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there for us in miraculous ways, like He was for Ibrahim alayhi salam. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن العظيم ونفعني وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم أستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. So alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure and honor to be here with the community and to get to visit here again. And inshallah, my visit this particular time is in connection, inshallah, with a program, a class that we'll be having this evening, exactly on the topic that we talked about, which is dua. And we'll talk about how to properly make dua. How can our du'as be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What are the things that prevent our du'as from being accepted by Allah? And how we can work towards making dua a powerful, life-changing, meaningful outlet for us to connect to Allah, to solve our problems, to find the solutions, the answers to our questions in life. And how dua can become something very real and tangible and powerful within our lives. And that will be this evening here, inshallah, at the Islamic Center at 7 p.m. So I encourage and ask everyone, inshallah, to come and join us so that we can invest a couple of hours in together to learn about dua and how to make dua properly and how the Prophet ﷺ utilized dua at the most powerful moments and experiences of his life. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all the ability to constantly stay connected to Him. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability and the insight to use dua to solve our problems. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make dua the answers to our questions, the solution to our problems, the remedy for our difficulties and adversities. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the ability to practice everything that was said and heard. Allahumma a'izz al-Islam wal-Muslimin. Allahumma ansur al-Islam wal-Muslimin. Allahumma ahdina wa ahdibina wa ja'alna sababan liman ihtada. Allahumma a'inna ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. Allahumma ahsin aqibatana fil umuri kulliha wa ajirna min khizyi dunya wa adhab al-akhirah. Allahumma waffiqna lima tuhibbu wa tarda. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala nabiyyil kareem. Also, please remember in your du'as all the people throughout the world who are in suffering. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate their suffering. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easier for them. From our brothers and sisters all across the world, in Syria, in Palestine, in Egypt, in Burma, in Somalia, all throughout the world. Wherever there are people suffering, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easier for them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate their suffering. And may Allah make it a means of elevating their status in this life and the next. قال الله تعالى إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله يذكركم وادعوه يستجب لكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون أقم الصلاة